In the vast expanse of the galactic community, where 1,000 alien civilizations trade, negotiate, and coexist under the watchful eye of the Galactic Council, there exists a universal truth that every species has learned to respect: never underestimate the quiet ones. The humans had been silent members of the galactic community for barely 2 decades. They paid their dues, followed the laws, kept to themselves mostly. Their single representative world seemed insignificant compared to the sprawling empires of the Zephyrians with their crystal cities, or the mighty Crotheri whose war fleets could darken entire star systems. But silence, as the galaxy was about to learn, is not the same as weakness. When the luxury liner Celestial Dreams sent out its final, desperate transmission from the edge of the neutral zone, it carried more than just a plea for help. It carried the voices of 300 human civilians, miners, teachers, children returning from a cultural exchange program, all crying out as their ship was boarded by Sindari raiders who considered humans nothing more than exotic pets to be sold in the slave markets of the Outer Rim. The Galactic Council received the distress call. They filed it appropriately. They sent their regrets to the human ambassador. Another tragedy in the vast cosmos, they said. These things happen in the dangerous sectors, they explained. The humans should have known better than to travel through such contested space. What they didn't know, what none of them understood, was that those 300 voices belonged to citizens of Earth. And Earth, despite its quiet demeanor in council chambers, despite its modest fleet and single world representation, was not alone. Hidden in the darkness between stars, scattered across colony worlds whose locations were known only in the deepest archives of human military intelligence, lay a truth that would shake the foundations of galactic civilization: humanity had not expanded slowly out of caution. They had expanded quietly out of strategy. And, when the call went out across the hidden networks, when the message reached every human settlement from the core worlds to the frontier colonies, when 300 voices cried out for justice that would never come through official channels, that's when the galaxy learned what humanity meant by the phrase family first. The Sindari had made a fatal mistake. They had assumed that, like every other species in the galaxy, humans would accept the Council's diplomatic response, file their protests, and move on. They were about to discover just how wrong assumptions could be when applied to a species that had clawed its way up from a death world where everything wanted to kill them, where survival meant protecting not just yourself, but everyone who stood with you. The distress call had ended in screams and static. The response would end in something far more permanent. The luxury liner Celestial Dreams drifted through the void like a wounded whale, her hull breached in 17 places, her elegant observation decks now open to the merciless vacuum of space. What had once been the pride of the Human Colonial Transport Authority, a ship designed to ferry families between the core worlds and the outer colonies in comfort and style, was now a tomb spinning slowly against the starfield. Captain Sarachen floated in the wreckage of her bridge, her uniform torn and stained with blood that had long since frozen in the zero atmosphere. Her eyes stared sightlessly at the communication console where the distress beacon continued its automated transmission, broadcasting the ship's final moments to any vessel within range of its failing power cells. The attack had come without warning. The Celestial Dreams had been 3 days out from New Geneva Colony, carrying 300 civilian passengers back to Earth for the annual Unity Day celebrations. Families returning home after years of colonial service, children who had been born on the frontier world's end, were seeing humanity's birth world for the first time, elderly couples taking what might be their last trip between the stars. Among the passengers had been the Nakamura family from the agricultural colony of Haven's Rest, DR. Kenji Nakamura, the colony's chief botanist, his wife Maria, a schoolteacher, and their twin daughters, Yuki and Hana, aged 7. The twins had been clutching stuffed animals and coloring books when the raiders struck, their wide eyes full of excitement about seeing the legendary blue oceans of Earth. There had been the Morrison mining crew from the asteroid belt operations around Kepler 442, rough men and women who had spent 5 years extracting rare Earth elements from the system's rocky debris. They were going home with enough money to retire, planning to buy small farms in the Canadian provinces and never leave Earth's gravity well again. Professor Elena Vasquez had been returning from her anthropological study of the human settlements on Rigel 3, her research bags filled with cultural artifacts and recordings of the unique dialects that had evolved in the outer colonies. She had spent her life documenting how humanity adapted and changed as it spread across the galaxy, preserving the variations of human experience for future generations. All of them, every single soul aboard the Celestial Dreams, had been aboard when the Sindari attack fleet emerged from hyperspace like predators smelling blood. The Sindari were not an uncommon sight in the border regions. A species of tall, reptilian humanoids with silver scales and cold, calculating yellow eyes, they had built their society around the concept of acquisition. To them, every other species in the galaxy existed primarily as a resource to be harvested, whether that meant their technology, their labor, or in some cases, their bodies for the exotic slave markets that operated in the lawless sectors beyond Galactic Council jurisdiction. They had looked at the passenger manifest of the celestial dreams and seen not people, but profit margins. Humans were still relatively new to the galactic community, and their unique biology, their resilience, their adaptability, their surprising emotional range made them valuable commodities in certain circles. A single healthy human could sell for 50,000 credits in the right market. A human child, with decades of potential service ahead, could bring twice that. 300 humans represented a fortune beyond the dreams of most pirates. The battle, if it could even be called that, had lasted less than 20 minutes. The Celestial Dreams was a civilian vessel, equipped with basic defensive shields and a handful of point defense lasers designed to ward off debris and small asteroids. Against the Sindari attack fleet, 6 heavily armed warships that had been customized for maximum intimidation and boarding efficiency, she might as well have been defenseless. Captain Chen had tried to run, pushing the liner's engines past their safety limits in a desperate attempt to reach the hyperspace jump point. But the Sindari had anticipated this, positioning their ships to cut off every escape route. When the liner's shields finally collapsed under the concentrated fire, the raiders had moved in with the precision of a pack of wolves bringing down a wounded deer. The boarding had been swift and brutal. Sindari warriors, clad in powered armor and wielding neural stunners, had swept through the ship's corridors like a tide of silver death. The civilian passengers, many of whom had never even seen combat, had no chance of resistance. Those who tried to fight were killed immediately as examples. Those who surrendered were herded into the cargo holds like livestock. But the Sindari had made one crucial error in their calculations. They had assumed, like most species in the galaxy, that humans were just another weak race protected only by the thin veneer of galactic civilization. They had assumed that without their technology and their ships, humans were just another species of prey. They had not understood that humans were different in ways that couldn't be measured in weapon specifications or shield strength. Captain Chen had managed to lock herself in the bridge's emergency bunker before the boarders reached her position. With the ship's main computers failing and life support bleeding atmosphere through the hull breaches, she had only minutes to act. Instead of trying to save herself, she had done something that would echo across human space with consequences the Sindari could never have imagined. She had activated the ship's emergency beacon, but not the standard Galactic Council distress signal that would have been filed away in some bureaucrat's desk drawer. Instead, she had accessed a communication protocol that was buried deep in the ship's memory banks, a frequency that was theoretically unused, officially non-existent. The Human Colonial Defense Network. The transmission that went out from the dying Celestial Dreams was not a plea for help directed at the Galactic Council or the local patrol fleets. It was a message sent along hidden relay stations and cloaked communication satellites, bounced through systems that appeared on no official charts, carrying the authentication codes that had been given to every human ship captain since the first colony vessels had left Earth. The message was simple, encoded in a compression algorithm that reduced 3 hours of horror into a burst transmission lasting less than 15 seconds. It contained the ship's position, the identity of the attackers, and, most importantly, a complete passenger manifest with the biometric data of every civilian aboard. But the message carried something else, something that transformed it from a simple distress call into something far more significant. It carried Captain Chen's final words, spoken as the atmosphere leaked from her lungs and her vision began to darken. They took our families. All of them. They took our children. The transmission reached the first relay station within 6 hours. From there, it cascaded through the network like wildfire, jumping from system to system, moving through communication channels that the Galactic Council had never detected, reaching destinations that existed in no official records. On Earth, Admiral Marcus Thompson was enjoying his morning coffee in his office at Pacific Fleet Command when the priority alert chimed on his personal communicator. The message that appeared on his screen made him set down his cup with hands that trembled not from age, but from a rage that he had not felt since the last days of the border wars. 300 civilians. Families. Children. Thompson had been one of the architects of humanity's expansion into space, and he knew secrets that were never spoken of in the sanitized briefings given to the Galactic Council. He knew about the hidden colonies, the black sites, the military installations that officially didn't exist. He knew about the ships that carried no registration numbers and answered to no government except the shadow organization that had guided humanity's growth since the early days of interstellar travel. Most importantly, he knew about the assets that had been positioned throughout the galaxy for exactly this kind of situation. The Admiral's fingers moved across his keyboard with practiced efficiency, accessing files that required his personal biometric signature and the authorization codes of 2 other flag officers. Within minutes, he was connected to a secure communication network that linked him to dozens of other commanders scattered across human space. The response was immediate and unanimous. Every human military commander who received the alert felt the same cold fury, the same primal need for justice that had driven their species since the first human had stood up to defend their tribe against the dangers of the night. The Sindari had made the mistake of believing that humanity's quiet diplomacy in the Galactic Council represented the full extent of their capability. They had assumed that, like most civilized species, humans would accept that some losses were inevitable in the dangerous sectors of space, that sometimes civilians died, and justice was nothing more than a diplomatic protest. They had no idea that humanity had never forgotten the lessons of their homeworld, where survival had always depended on the simple principle that an attack on one was an attack on all, where the protection of the weak and the innocent was not just a moral imperative, but a species survival trait that had been hardwired into their DNA by millions of years of evolution. Within 12 hours of the Celestial Dream's final transmission, orders were moving through the hidden networks of human space. Ships that existed in no official registry began powering up their engines. Crews that had been living quiet lives as merchants, miners, and colonists received coded messages that activated protocols they had hoped never to use. And, in the deep space facilities that the galaxy had never suspected existed, humanity's true military might begin to stir. The Sindari raiders, meanwhile, were celebrating their success as they herded their human captives into the slave pens of their base on Corthax Prime. They had no idea that their casual brutality had just awakened something that would hunt them to the very edges of known space. The galaxy was about to learn what happened when you threatened humanity's children. And the lesson would be written in fire across the stars. Admiral Thompson stood at the observation deck of his command ship, watching as the first elements of the response fleet assembled in the darkness beyond Earth's moon. The ships that gathered there bore no markings, flew no flags, and existed in no official records. But they were real, and they were angry, and they carried weapons that the Galactic Council had never suspected humanity possessed. 300 civilians had cried out for justice. And justice, with all the fury of a species born from a world that had tried to kill them every day for millions of years, was coming to answer that call. The hunt had begun. Commander Elena Vesquez, not the anthropologist who had died aboard the Celestial Dreams, but her cousin, a career military officer who had taken her family name in honor of the dead, stood on the bridge of the stealth destroyer Retribution's edge and watched as the most powerful fleet humanity had ever assembled slowly materialized from the darkness. They came from everywhere and nowhere, ships that had been hiding in the deep cold between stars for decades, crews that had been living double lives as civilians while maintaining the skills and equipment needed for this exact moment. The official records of every major government in human space would show these vessels as decommissioned, scrapped, or lost to accidents. The reality was very different. The Nemesis, a dreadnought-class vessel that officially had been destroyed in a training accident near Jupiter 5 years ago, emerged from the shadow of an asteroid with her weapon systems already powered and her hull configured for maximum stealth. Her captain, Maria Santos, had spent those 5 years supposedly dead, actually commanding a deep space reconnaissance mission that had mapped every Sindari base and supply route within 50 light-years of human territory. The strike carrier Unforgiving Dawn had officially been mothballed and sold for scrap to a civilian salvage company. In reality, she had been converted into a mobile command center capable of coordinating fleet operations across multiple star systems simultaneously. Her fighter bays housed not the aging interceptors that appeared in her public specifications, but cutting-edge stealth fighters equipped with weapons that pushed the boundaries of what the Galactic Council considered acceptable military technology. Destroyer squadrons that had supposedly been transferred to colonial defense forces revealed themselves to be fully operational units equipped with experimental cloaking systems that made them invisible to anything short of active sensor sweeps. Their crews were volunteers who had given up their official lives to serve in a capacity that their governments could never officially acknowledge. Most impressive of all was the Earthshaker, a vessel so classified that only a dozen people in human space knew of her existence. She appeared to be nothing more than a converted asteroid mining platform, her hull studded with what looked like industrial equipment and mineral processing facilities. But, hidden beneath that disguise was a weapons platform that could crack a planet's crust or vaporize an entire fleet. Admiral Thompson's command ship, the Final Justice, took position at the center of the growing formation. Unlike the other vessels, she made no attempt at concealment or deception. She was exactly what she appeared to be, a state-of-the-art command dreadnought bristling with the most advanced weapons humanity could build, her hull marked with the insignia of no nation or government, only a simple symbol that every human in the fleet recognized, the outline of Earth, surrounded by stars, with the words "Never Again" inscribed beneath. As the last ships took their positions in the formation, Thompson opened a fleet-wide communication channel. His image appeared on screens throughout the assembled armada, his weathered face showing the weight of command and the cold determination of a man who had seen too many good people die to allow evil to go unpunished. "Officers and crew of the defense fleet," he began, his voice carrying clearly across the quantum encryption that linked the ships. 6 days ago, the civilian transport Celestial Dreams was attacked and boarded by Sindari raiders while traveling through what should have been secure space. 300 civilians, men, women, and children, were taken as slaves to be sold in markets that exist beyond the reach of galactic law. He paused, letting the weight of those words settle over the thousands of personnel listening throughout the fleet. Many of them had families of their own on the colony worlds, children who might have been aboard a ship like the Celestial Dreams if circumstances had been different. "The Galactic Council has expressed their regrets," Thompson continued, his tone growing harder. "They have filed the appropriate protests with the Sindari government, who deny any knowledge of rogue elements operating in their territory. They have suggested that we accept this tragedy as one of the inevitable costs of expansion into dangerous space." A low murmur ran through the communication channel as hundreds of crew members responded with the kind of language that would never appear in official reports. Thompson allowed it for a moment before continuing. "The Council believes that humanity will accept this response because that is what civilized species do. They compromise. They negotiate. They accept that sometimes evil wins because the cost of fighting it is too high." His eyes seemed to look directly at each person watching, conveying a message that went deeper than words. "They don't understand that we are not like other species. They don't understand what we learned in the dark years when our homeworld tried to kill us every single day." The fleet hung in space around him, thousands of tons of metal and weapons and humanity's finest warriors, all focused on the man who was about to give them permission to do what every human instinct demanded. "We learned that evil flourishes when good people do nothing. We learned that the strong have a responsibility to protect the weak. Most importantly, we learned that when family calls for help, you answer, no matter the cost." Thompson's voice rose slightly, taking on the cadence of a battle hymn. "Those 300 souls were our family. Every human civilian who travels between the stars is our family. And, when family is threatened, we don't file protests or express regrets." He leaned forward slightly, his image filling the screens throughout the fleet. "We end the threat. Permanently." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Throughout the assembled ships, crews who had spent years preparing for this moment let out a cheer that would have been heard across the vacuum if sound could travel between stars. These were people who had given up normal lives, comfortable careers, and easy assignments to serve in a capacity that their own governments could never officially acknowledge. They had done it because they understood something that the peaceful species of the galaxy had forgotten, that civilization existed only because rough people stood ready to do violence on its behalf. "Our intelligence networks have located the Sindari base where our people are being held," Thompson continued as the cheering subsided. "Korthax Prime, a rogue world in the neutral zone that serves as the central hub for their slave trading operations. It is heavily defended, surrounded by minefields and patrol ships, and protected by a defensive fleet that includes some of the most advanced warships in Sindari space." He smiled then, an expression that contained no warmth but promised swift and final justice. "It won't be enough." The tactical display activated, showing a three-dimensional map of the Korthax system. The planet appeared as a red dot surrounded by concentric circles representing defensive installations, patrol routes, and weapon platforms. To most military commanders, it would have looked like an impregnable fortress. To the officers studying it now, it looked like a problem with a clear solution. "We will not be conducting a rescue mission," Thompson explained as the display zoomed in on specific targets. "Rescue missions are what you launch when you want to minimize casualties and avoid diplomatic complications. What we will be conducting is a cleansing operation." The terminology was precise and intentional. In the hidden protocols that governed humanity's shadow military, cleansing operations were reserved for threats that were deemed too dangerous to be allowed continued existence. They were total war condensed into a surgical strike, designed not just to achieve tactical objectives but to send a message that would echo across the galaxy. Every Sindari installation in the Korthax system will be destroyed. Every ship that attempts to flee will be hunted down and eliminated. Every individual involved in the slave trade will be considered a valid military target. Thompson's voice remained steady and professional, but there was something underneath it that spoke of fires banked but not extinguished. "We will recover our people, and we will ensure that the Sindari never again mistake human civility for weakness." The fleet began to move then, not with the slow, ponderous motion of conventional warships, but with the swift precision of predators that had scented blood. The stealth ships activated their cloaking systems and vanished from sensors, beginning their journey to forward positions where they could observe and report on enemy movements. The heavy assault units began charging their jump drives, preparing for the hyperspace transition that would bring them to the edge of the Korthax system in a matter of hours rather than days. But, perhaps most importantly, the support vessels began deploying the assets that would make this operation possible. Communication relay stations that would allow real-time coordination across multiple light years. Sensor platforms that could detect and track every ship in the target system. And, most critical of all, the quantum transmitters that would ensure that every moment of the coming battle was recorded and broadcast to specific recipients throughout the galaxy. This would not be a secret operation hidden from the view of the galactic community. This would be a demonstration, a lesson taught in fire and fury to anyone who might be tempted to view humanity as easy prey. On Earth, in a secure facility buried deep beneath the Antarctic ice sheet, a team of intelligence analysts worked frantically to compile every piece of information available about Sindari operations in the neutral zone. Their work was being transmitted directly to the fleet, providing real-time updates on enemy positions, defensive capabilities, and, most importantly, the locations where human civilians were being held. The analysis revealed the true scope of the Sindari operation. Korthax Prime was not just a single slave market, but the center of a network that stretched across dozens of systems. The 300 humans from the Celestial Dreams were just the latest addition to a population of nearly 2,000 sentients from various species who had been captured and were awaiting sale to buyers throughout the galaxy. The revelation only strengthened the resolve of the fleet commanders. This was not just about recovering their own people, this was about striking a blow against a system of evil that had been allowed to operate with impunity for too long. As the fleet prepared for its final jump into the Korthax system, Admiral Thompson stood alone in his ready room, looking out at the stars through a viewport that showed the vast emptiness of space. He thought about the families that had trusted their government to protect them when they ventured beyond the safety of human space. He thought about the children who had been excited to see Earth for the first time, who were now imprisoned in alien cages far from home. Most of all, he thought about the promise that humanity had made when it first reached for the stars, that no human would ever again face the darkness alone, that the species that had survived the crucible of Earth would stand together against whatever threats the galaxy might hold. The Sindari had tested that promise. They were about to learn the price of their mistake. The fleet jumped to hyperspace, leaving behind only empty space and the fading echoes of drives pushed beyond their normal limits. Behind them, Earth continued its slow rotation, unaware that its children were about to teach the galaxy a lesson that would be remembered for generations to come. The hunt was no longer coming. The hunt had arrived. The Korthax system had not been chosen as the center of Sindari slave operations by accident. Located in the neutral zone between three major galactic powers, it occupied a region of space where no single government claimed jurisdiction and where the Galactic Council's authority was little more than a polite suggestion. The system's primary star was an unstable red giant that generated massive electromagnetic disturbances, making long-range sensor detection nearly impossible and providing natural cover for activities that preferred to remain hidden. Korthak's Prime itself was a world that seemed designed for villainy. Its surface was a patchwork of volcanic wastelands and toxic swamps, wreathed in clouds of sulfurous gas that made the atmosphere barely breathable even with artificial filtration. The only habitable areas were a series of underground complexes that had been carved from solid rock, creating a labyrinthine network of tunnels, holding cells, and auction chambers where sentient beings were bought and sold like livestock. The planet's orbital defenses were impressive by any standard. 3 massive battle stations hung in geosynchronous orbit above the primary slave markets, their weapon arrays capable of obliterating any ship foolish enough to approach without proper authorization. A network of automated defense platforms created overlapping fields of fire that could destroy entire fleets, while cloaked sensor stations monitored every approach vector for signs of unwanted visitors. More importantly, the system was home to the Sindari 4th Assault Fleet, a collection of warships that represented the cutting edge of their military technology. The fleet was commanded by War Leader SSS Then, a veteran of dozens of raids who had earned his position through a combination of tactical brilliance and absolute ruthlessness. His flagship, the Venomous Fawn, was a dreadnought-class vessel that had never lost a battle, its hull decorated with the battle honors of 100 successful operations. War Leader SSS Then stood on his command bridge, his yellow eyes scanning the tactical displays that showed the current status of his defensive network. Everything appeared normal: patrol ships moving along their designated routes, sensor stations reporting no unusual activity, the orbital defense platforms maintaining their silent vigil over the approaches to his domain. He was reviewing the manifest of the latest arrivals when his sensor operator, a young Sindari named Veskar, suddenly straightened at his station. "War Leader," the operator said, his voice carrying a note of uncertainty, "I'm detecting some unusual readings at the edge of our sensor range. Gravitational disturbances consistent with ships dropping out of hyperspace, but there's nothing there." SSS then moved to the sensor station, his scaled fingers dancing across the control panel as he called up the relevant data. The readings were indeed strange, clear evidence of hyperspace exits, but no corresponding contacts on any of their detection systems. "Sensor ghosts," he said after a moment, though his tone suggested he didn't entirely believe his own explanation. "The star's electromagnetic output has been increasing over the past few days. It's probably causing interference with our equipment." But, even as he spoke, more reports began coming in from across the system. Patrol ships reported brief contacts that vanished before they could be properly identified. Automated sensor platforms detected movement in areas where no ships were supposed to be. The defense stations reported targeting solutions that appeared and disappeared in seconds. What War Leader SSS then didn't know was that he was witnessing the opening moves of the most sophisticated military operation humanity had ever conducted. The ships that were appearing and vanishing at the edge of his sensors were not malfunctioning equipment or electromagnetic ghosts, they were the stealth reconnaissance vessels of Admiral Thompson's fleet, using cloaking technology that rendered them effectively invisible to everything except the most advanced sensor arrays. Commander Sarah Kim, captain of the stealth frigate Ghostwalker, watched her tactical display as her ship moved through the outer system like a phantom. Her vessel was a marvel of human engineering, its hull composed of metamaterials that absorbed rather than reflected sensor waves, its engines designed to minimize electromagnetic signatures, its crew trained to operate in complete silence for days at a time. "Contact bearing 27 Mark III, her sensor operator reported in a whisper. "Sindari patrol ship, Razor's Edge class destroyer. Range 12,000 kilometers." Kim nodded, making a note on her tactical pad. The Ghostwalker was not here to fight, her mission was reconnaissance and intelligence gathering, mapping the exact positions and capabilities of every enemy asset in the system. The data she collected would be transmitted back to the main fleet in compressed bursts that would be nearly impossible to detect, building a complete picture of the enemy's defenses. Similar scenes were playing out throughout the Korthak system as a dozen stealth ships conducted the most thorough intelligence operation in human military history. They mapped patrol routes and defensive positions, identified command ships and communication nodes, and, most importantly, located the exact positions where human civilians were being held. The main fleet, meanwhile, had taken position at the very edge of the system, hidden within the sensor shadow of a dead planet whose orbit had decayed beyond the point where the Sindari bothered to monitor it. Admiral Thompson studied the intelligence reports as they came in, building a three-dimensional picture of the enemy's capabilities and weaknesses. Final count shows 43 enemy vessels of destroyer class or larger, reported his intelligence officer, Commander Lisa Chen. 3 orbital battle stations with heavy plasma cannons and antimatter torpedo launchers. Approximately 200 automated defense platforms scattered throughout the inner system. Thompson nodded, cross-referencing the data with his own tactical assessments. It was indeed a formidable defensive array, more than enough to destroy any conventional rescue mission that might have been launched by the official forces of human space. But this was not a conventional rescue mission. What about the civilian holding areas? He asked. We've identified 17 separate facilities, Chen replied, calling up a detailed schematic of the underground complexes on Korthax Prime. The humans from the Celestial Dreams are being held in Section 7, approximately 2 kilometers below the surface. Heavy security, multiple access points, but our penetration teams have identified viable entry routes. The Admiral studied the layout carefully, noting the positions of guard posts, surveillance systems, and the location of emergency procedures that could be used to either move or eliminate prisoners if the facility came under attack. It was the kind of detailed intelligence that could only be obtained through careful observation and analysis, the kind that saved lives when every second counted. Estimated civilian casualties if we launch a direct assault, he asked. Chen hesitated for a moment before answering. Potentially severe. The Sindari have a documented history of eliminating prisoners rather than allowing them to be rescued. If they detect our approach early enough to activate emergency protocols. She didn't need to finish the sentence. Everyone on the bridge understood the implications. A conventional assault, no matter how overwhelming, would likely result in the deaths of the very people they were trying to save. Which was why Admiral Thompson had no intention of launching a conventional assault. Signal the infiltration teams, he ordered. Operation Ghostwalk is authorized. Throughout the outer system, ships that had been hiding in the shadows of asteroids and debris fields began to move. These were not the massive dreadnoughts and carriers that formed the backbone of the fleet, but smaller, more specialized vessels designed for a very specific type of warfare. The transport Silent Death was officially classified as a civilian cargo hauler, her hull scarred and weathered to suggest years of hard use in the commercial shipping lanes. But hidden within her cargo bays were not goods for trade, but 2 companies of humanity's most elite soldiers, men and women who had trained for years in the arts of infiltration, assassination, and precision warfare. Major Jake Morrison, commander of the 1st Special Operations Company, checked his equipment one final time as his transport approached the outer edge of the Korthax defense perimeter. His team was equipped with the most advanced stealth technology humanity could produce, personal cloaking fields that rendered them nearly invisible, weapons that could eliminate targets without making a sound, and, most importantly, detailed intelligence about their targets that would allow them to move through the enemy installation like ghosts. Remember, he told his team as they prepared for deployment, this is not a smash-and-grab operation. We go in quiet, we locate our people, and we extract them without alerting the main defenses. The fleet doesn't begin its attack until every civilian is clear of the danger zone. The plan was audacious in its complexity and precision. While the Sindari focused their attention on the outer system where their sensors were detecting phantom contacts, human infiltration teams would penetrate their supposedly impregnable fortress and extract the prisoners without anyone knowing they were there. It would require perfect timing, flawless execution, and a level of coordination that pushed the boundaries of what was militarily possible. It would also require something that the Sindari could not understand, a willingness to risk everything to save people who were not soldiers, who could not contribute to the war effort, who were valuable only because they were human, and that was enough. The first infiltration pods launched from the Silent Death just as war leader SSS then was receiving reports of more sensor anomalies from across his defensive perimeter. The pods were little more than armored coffins equipped with minimal life support and stealth systems, designed to carry a single soldier through space and atmosphere without being detected. Major Morrison felt the familiar sensation of atmospheric entry as his pod streaked toward the surface of Korthax Prime, its heat shields glowing cherry red as they absorbed the thermal energy of the descent. Around him, 47 other pods followed similar trajectories, all aimed at landing sites that had been carefully selected to avoid detection by the planet's surface sensors. The pod hit the ground with a bone-jarring impact that would have killed an unprotected human, but Morrison's powered armor absorbed the shock and kept him conscious and mobile. He emerged from the smoking wreckage of his transport into the toxic atmosphere of Korthax Prime, his suit's life support systems immediately switching to internal air as the environmental sensors detected lethal concentrations of hydrogen sulfide and methane. All around him, the other members of his team were emerging from their own pods, weapons ready, moving with the practiced efficiency of soldiers who had trained for this exact scenario hundreds of times. Within minutes, they had formed up into assault teams and begun moving toward their designated entry points into the underground slave markets. Above them, War Leader SSS then was growing increasingly concerned about the sensor readings his operators were reporting. The gravitational disturbances were becoming more frequent and more pronounced, suggesting the presence of a large number of ships at the very edge of his detection range. Increase patrol frequency along the outer perimeter, he ordered. I want every cubic meter of space within 50,000 kilometers of this planet scanned and re-scanned. If there's someone out there, I want to know about it. He had no way of knowing that his orders were already too late. The infiltration teams were on the ground and moving toward their targets. The rescue operation had begun, and, before the Sindari realized what was happening, the first phase of humanity's response to the Celestial Dreams massacre would be complete. The hunt was no longer a distant threat. It was here, moving through the shadows of their fortress, coming for the people they had stolen and the justice they had thought themselves beyond. The galaxy was about to learn what happened when predators made the mistake of threatening humanity's young. The underground slave markets of Korthax Prime existed in a world of perpetual twilight, lit by harsh industrial lighting that cast everything in sickly yellow shadows. The air was thick with the stench of unwashed bodies, fear, and the chemical residue of the atmospheric processors that made the tunnels barely habitable. In the holding cells that lined the main corridors, hundreds of sentient beings from dozens of different species waited in varying states of despair for the auctions that would determine their fate. Dr. Kenji Nakamura sat in the corner of cell block 7, his arms wrapped around his twin daughters as they slept fitfully against his chest. Yuki and Hana had not spoken since the second day of their captivity, their 7-year-old minds unable to process the reality of their situation. His wife Maria lay nearby, her face pale and drawn, her teacher's hands now marked with bruises from the guards who had found her attempts to maintain discipline among the younger prisoners to be amusing. Around them, the other survivors from the Celestial Dreams tried to maintain some semblance of hope. The Morrison mining crew had attempted to organize an escape attempt on the 4th day, only to watch helplessly as 3 of their number were dragged away as an example to the others. Professor Elena Vasquez had tried to document their captivity, keeping careful notes on their treatment and the layout of the facility, as if her academic training could somehow make sense of the nightmare they found themselves in. But hope was becoming harder to maintain with each passing hour. They had all heard the stories whispered by the other prisoners, tales of auctions where families were separated forever, of buyers who purchased sentience for purposes that did not bear thinking about, of slaves who disappeared into the darkness of the galaxy and were never seen again. What none of them knew was that at that very moment, Major Jake Morrison and his infiltration team were moving through the service tunnels just meters above their heads, following routes that had been mapped by reconnaissance drones so small they were virtually invisible to the naked eye. Morrison's heads-up display showed the layout of the facility in perfect detail, every guard position marked, every surveillance system identified, every possible escape route highlighted in different colors depending on the level of risk they presented. His team moved with the fluid precision of dancers, each step carefully calculated to avoid detection by the motion sensors and pressure plates that the Sindari had scattered throughout their stronghold. Tango 7, this is Alpha 1, Morrison whispered into his throat microphone, his voice transmitted through quantum encryption that was impossible to intercept. I have visual on the primary holding area. Count approximately 200 prisoners, including our target package. Heavy guard presence, but positions are predictable. The response came immediately from the command ship orbiting at the edge of the system. Alpha 1, Tango 7. You are authorized to proceed with extraction. Remember, we need every civilian clear before the fireworks start. Morrison acknowledged and signaled to his team. Around him, 47 of humanity's most elite soldiers began moving toward their assigned positions with the kind of coordinated precision that came from years of training and absolute trust in each other's capabilities. The first guards died without ever knowing they were under attack. Sergeant Lisa Rodriguez, a former police officer from New Angeles Colony, eliminated 3 Sindari sentries with her vibroblade, the weapon's monomolecular edge slicing through alien flesh and bone without making a sound. Corporal David Kim used his neural disruptor to render 4 more guards unconscious, their bodies collapsing silently to the floor as their nervous systems shut down temporarily. Within minutes, the human team had neutralized every guard in the facility without triggering a single alarm. The Sindari, for all their reputation as warriors and raiders, had never faced opponents who combined human tactical thinking with technology that exceeded anything in their arsenal. Dr. Nakamura looked up in confusion as the door to his cell opened with a soft hiss. He had expected to see another Sindari guard, perhaps coming to select more prisoners for the slave auctions. Instead, a figure in matte black armor stepped through the doorway, moving with predatory grace that somehow managed to be reassuring rather than threatening. The armor was unlike anything he had ever seen, clearly human in design, but incorporating technology that seemed decades ahead of anything he knew existed. The helmet concealed the wearer's face behind a featureless visor that reflected the cell's dim lighting like the surface of still water. Dr. Nakamura? The voice was unmistakably human, female, with a slight accent that suggested origins in the Australian colonies. I'm Lieutenant Sarah Kim, 1st Special Operations Company. I'm here to take you and your family home. For a moment, Nakamura could only stare in shock. The idea of rescue had become so remote that he had almost stopped believing it was possible. But here was a human soldier, speaking English, offering hope where none had existed just moments before. My daughters, he whispered, his voice hoarse from days of breathing the toxic atmosphere. They're just children. They don't understand what's happening. Lieutenant Kim knelt beside the twins, her armored hands gentle as she checked their vital signs with medical scanners built into her suit's fingertips. They're going to be fine, Doctor. Both of them. But we need to move quickly. Can you wake them without causing a disturbance? Throughout the holding facility, similar scenes were playing out as the rescue teams made contact with the civilians they had come to save. The operation was proceeding with clockwork precision, each team member executing their assigned role with the kind of flawless efficiency that made the impossible look routine. But, even as the rescue operation proceeded, the larger strategic situation was developing in ways that would soon make stealth irrelevant. War leader SSS then had finally decided to investigate the sensor anomalies personally, taking his flagship and a squadron of escort vessels toward the outer system where his long-range sensors were detecting increasingly obvious signs of an approaching fleet. What he found when he reached the edge of his sensor perimeter defied all of his military experience. The ships that materialized from the darkness were like nothing in his databases, sleek predatory forms that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, their hulls marked only with symbols that his computer systems could not identify. The lead vessel was particularly impressive, a massive dreadnought that dwarfed even his own flagship while somehow managing to look fast and maneuverable despite its size. As he watched, weapons ports opened along its hull, revealing cannon barrels that gleamed with the distinctive blue-white glow of charged particle accelerators. Unknown vessels, SSS then broadcast on all emergency frequencies, you are in violation of Sindari territorial space. Identify yourselves immediately or we will be forced to consider you hostile. The response came not from the lead ship, but from a source that his communication officers could not identify, a transmission that seemed to come from everywhere at once, as if the very vacuum of space was speaking. This is Admiral Marcus Thompson of the Human Colonial Defense Force. You are in possession of 300 human civilians who were taken from the transport vessel Celestial Dreams. You will release them immediately and surrender yourselves for trial under the laws of civilized space. SSS then felt a cold chill run down his spine. Humans were supposed to be a weak species, newly emerged onto the galactic stage and utterly dependent on the protection of the Galactic Council. The ships facing him suggested otherwise. More importantly, the tone of the transmission carried a conviction and authority that spoke of power backed by absolute determination. I know nothing of any human transport, he replied, though his voice lacked its usual confidence. This system is under Sindari jurisdiction. Leave immediately or face the consequences. Admiral Thompson's response was immediate and devastating in its simplicity. War Leader SSS then, commanding the 4th Assault Fleet, operating from the slave markets of Korthax Prime. We know exactly who you are and what you've done. Your time is over. The casual way the human admiral recited information that should have been classified sent ice through SSS then's veins. How could they possibly know so much about his operations? How long had they been watching? And, most importantly, what else did they know? His questions were answered when his tactical officer suddenly straightened at his station, his scaled face pale with shock. "War leader," the officer said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I'm detecting massive energy signatures throughout the system. They're everywhere." The tactical display activated, showing the Korthax system in 3 dimensions with every ship and defensive installation marked in different colors. What SSS then saw made his blood run cold. The human fleet wasn't just at the edge of the system, they were throughout the system, ships that had somehow penetrated his defenses without being detected, taking positions that would allow them to destroy his forces in detail. But the most shocking revelation was the readout from the surface of Korthax Prime itself. The planetary sensors, which should have shown the usual patterns of activity around the slave markets, instead showed nothing but static. Every monitoring station, every communication relay, every surveillance system on the planet had gone dark simultaneously. "Sir," his communication officer reported, his voice tight with barely controlled panic, "I'm unable to raise any of our ground installations. All planetary communication systems appear to be offline." SSS then stared at the tactical display, finally, beginning to understand the true scope of what was happening. This wasn't a rescue mission, it was a military operation of unprecedented sophistication and scale. The humans hadn't just found his base, they had mapped his entire defensive network, infiltrated his facilities, and positioned themselves to destroy everything he had built. On the surface of Korthax Prime, Major Morrison was leading the last group of rescued civilians toward the extraction point, a hidden landing pad where stealth transports waited to carry them to safety. The operation had been a complete success. Every human from the Celestial Dreams had been recovered, along with nearly 200 other prisoners from various species who had been held in adjacent cells. "Tango 7, this is Alpha 1, he reported as his teams loaded the last of the evacuees onto the waiting transports. "All packages secured. Facility is clear for demolition." The response came immediately from Admiral Thompson himself. "Acknowledged, Alpha 1. Excellent work. Clear the area and prepare for Phase 2. As the stealth transports lifted off from the surface of Korthax Prime, carrying their precious cargo toward the safety of the human fleet, Morrison looked back at the underground complex that had been home to so much suffering. In a few minutes, it would cease to exist, along with every other Sindari installation in the system. But, more importantly, 300 human civilians would be going home. Children would see their parents again. Families would be reunited. Justice would be served. Above them all, Admiral Thompson stood on the bridge of his flagship and prepared to show the galaxy what happened when someone made the mistake of threatening humanity's innocence. The rescue phase of the operation was complete. Now came the reckoning. The war leader had asked for the consequences of his actions. He was about to receive them in full measure, delivered with all the fury of a species that had learned to survive by ensuring that threats to the tribe were eliminated completely and permanently. The galaxy was about to witness the other side of human nature, the side that had allowed them to crawl up from their death world and claim their place among the stars through sheer determination and refusal to yield to anyone who threatened what they protected. The lesson would be written in fire across the darkness, and it would be remembered for generations to come. War leader SSS then had commanded fleets in 17 major engagements throughout his career, had personally led raids on 43 different worlds, and had never once retreated from a battle. His reputation as a tactical genius was known throughout Sindari space, and his personal combat record included victories over opponents who had superior numbers, better technology, and more experienced crews. None of that experience had prepared him for what he saw on his tactical display as the human fleet revealed itself in its full, terrifying magnificence. They emerged from the darkness like something out of a nightmare, ships that had been hiding in the sensor shadows of asteroids and dead worlds, vessels that had been cloaked so effectively that they might as well have been invisible. But it was not just their stealth capabilities that sent ice through his veins, it was their sheer, overwhelming number and the alien beauty of their designs. The human ships were unlike anything in the Sindari databases. Where Sindari vessels were built for intimidation, bristling with weapon spines and armored plates designed to inspire fear in their enemies, the human ships were sleek and predatory, their hulls flowing like liquid metal, their weapon systems integrated so seamlessly that they appeared to be works of art rather than instruments of war. The dreadnought Final Justice hung at the center of the formation like a dark star, her massive bulk dwarfing even SSS Than's own flagship while somehow maintaining an aura of speed and maneuverability that defied physics. Around her, a constellation of smaller vessels, cruisers, destroyers, frigates, and ship types that his computer could not even classify took positions that spoke of tactical coordination beyond anything he had ever witnessed. Fleet strength assessment, he ordered his tactical officer, though he was not certain he wanted to know the answer. The officer's voice shook as he replied. Sir, I'm counting 143 vessels of destroyer class or larger. Multiple carrier groups with fighter complements that exceed our total fleet strength. And, sir, the energy signatures from their weapon systems are unlike anything in our databases. SSS then studied the tactical readouts, his experienced eye immediately recognizing the positions the human ships had taken. They had not just surrounded his forces, they had created overlapping fields of fire that would allow them to destroy his entire fleet while minimizing their own exposure to return fire. It was the kind of tactical positioning that spoke of commanders who understood warfare at a level that went beyond simple aggression. Open a channel to the human admiral, he ordered. Perhaps there was still time for negotiation, some way to avoid the complete destruction that seemed inevitable. Admiral Thompson's image appeared on the main view screen, and SSS then felt another chill run through him. The human's face showed no anger, no passion, no emotion at all. It was the expression of a professional soldier who had already made his decision and was simply waiting for the optimal moment to execute it. War Leader SSS then, Thompson said, his voice carrying clearly across the quantum communication link. I trust you have had time to assess your situation. Admiral Thompson, SSS then replied, fighting to keep his voice steady. I am prepared to discuss terms for the safe withdrawal of your forces from this system. Thompson's expression did not change. There are no terms to discuss. You attacked a civilian transport and enslaved 300 innocent people, including children. You have forfeited any right to negotiation. The Sindari commander felt desperation creeping into his voice. The Galactic Council's laws regarding neutral space operations clearly state that the Galactic Council, Thompson interrupted, his tone taking on an edge that cut like a blade, has proven itself inadequate to deal with threats to human civilians. We have therefore decided to handle the matter ourselves. On the bridge of the Final Justice, Admiral Thompson was watching displays that showed every aspect of the tactical situation in perfect detail. His ships had taken position according to a battle plan that had been refined through thousands of simulations, tested against every possible defensive strategy the Sindari might employ, and optimized for one specific outcome: the complete destruction of the enemy force with zero human casualties. Admiral, his communications officer reported, were receiving surrender offers from multiple Sindari vessels. Several of their escort ships are requesting permission to withdraw from the system. Thompson considered this for a moment. In a conventional military operation, accepting the surrender of enemy forces was both tactically sound and morally appropriate. But this was not a conventional military operation. This was a demonstration, a lesson being taught to the entire galaxy about the consequences of threatening human civilians. Denied, he said simply. No Sindari vessel leaves this system. No Sindari installation survives this day. They wanted to learn what happens when you attack our families. Today, they learn. Throughout the human fleet, crews that had been preparing for this moment for days received the final authorization codes. Weapon systems that represented the cutting edge of human military technology powered up to full charge. Targeting computers locked onto every Sindari ship and installation with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. War Leader SSS then watched in growing horror as the energy readings from the human weapons reached levels that should have been impossible. The particle accelerators alone were showing output ratings that exceeded anything his own ship could produce, and those appeared to be the least powerful weapons in their arsenal. All ships, he broadcast on the fleet emergency frequency, scatter pattern Delta 7. Jump to hyperspace immediately. Do not attempt to engage. But, even as he gave the order, he knew it was already too late. The human ships had positioned themselves to control every possible escape vector. More importantly, some kind of interference was preventing his ships from activating their hyperspace drives and technology that should not have existed. Sir, his navigation officer reported, his voice barely above a whisper, hyperspace drives are non-functional. We're detecting some kind of interdiction field throughout the system. Admiral Thompson's voice cut through the chaos on the Sindari command frequency, broadcasting on all channels simultaneously. War Leader SSS, then, you and your forces are guilty of crimes against sentient life. The sentence is death. There will be no appeals, no mercy, and no survivors to carry word of your defeat to others who might be tempted to follow your example. The first salvo came from the human dreadnought, particle beams that lanced across space with the power of miniature stars. The Sindari battle station orbiting Korthax Prime, a fortress that had been considered impregnable, simply ceased to exist as the coherent energy beams tore through its shields and armor as if they were made of paper. Around the system, the other human ships opened fire with weapons that defied everything the Sindari thought they knew about military technology. Plasma torpedoes that could track their targets through hyperspace. Graviton cannons that created localized black holes to tear enemy ships apart from within. Energy weapons that could strip electrons from matter at the atomic level, reducing enemy hulls to clouds of superheated gas. The venomous Fawn, SSS Than's flagship and the most powerful vessel in the Sindari arsenal, managed to survive the first exchange by rotating her armor and redirecting power from life support to defensive shields. But the respite was temporary. 3 human cruisers had bracketed his position, their weapons cycling through frequency modulations that made his shields useless. All power to engines, SSS then ordered desperately. Emergency burn toward the outer system. Maybe we can reach the jump point before. His words were cut off as the venomous Fang shuddered under the impact of weapons that seemed to ignore the laws of physics. His engineering officer reported catastrophic damage to the main reactor, hull breaches on 17 decks, and total failure of the weapon systems. But it was not the destruction of his ship that broke SSS Than's spirit. It was the methodical, almost casual way the human fleet was dismantling his forces. There was no passion in their attack, no rage or desire for revenge. They simply deleted each Sindari ship from existence with the same efficiency a farmer might use to clear weeds from a field. The battle, if it could be called that, lasted exactly 17 minutes. When it was over, the Korthax system contained no trace that the Sindari 4th Assault Fleet had ever existed. The orbital defense stations had been reduced to expanding clouds of debris. The automated weapon platforms had been systematically hunted down and destroyed. Even the underground slave markets on Korthax Prime had been obliterated by precision strikes that left craters where the tunnel complexes had once festered beneath the planet's surface. Admiral Thompson stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching as the last Sindari ship, a escort frigate that had tried to hide in the atmosphere of the system's gas giant, was located and eliminated by one of his hunter-killer squadrons. The tactical display now showed only human ships and expanding debris fields where the enemy had once been. All vessels report mission complete, his operations officer announced. No enemy survivors. No human casualties. All objectives achieved. Thompson nodded, but his expression remained grim. The battle was over, but the real work was just beginning. This demonstration would be meaningless if word of it did not reach the right ears, if the lesson was not learned by those who needed to understand it most clearly. Communications, he ordered, activate the broadcast array. Full spectrum transmission, all known frequencies. I want this message to reach every corner of the galaxy. The message that went out from the Korthax system was unlike any diplomatic communication in the history of interstellar relations. It was not a plea for understanding, not a justification for actions taken, not an appeal to higher authorities for sanction or approval. It was a simple statement of fact, delivered in Thompson's calm, professional voice, accompanied by complete tactical recordings of the battle that had just concluded. To all civilizations within range of this transmission, the message began, "This is Admiral Marcus Thompson of the Human Colonial Defense Force." At 1432 Galactic Standard Time, Sindari raiders attacked and destroyed the civilian transport Celestial Dreams, kidnapping 300 human civilians for sale in the slave markets of Korthax Prime. The recording showed the orbital battle in perfect detail, every moment of the Sindari fleet's destruction captured by sensors that missed nothing. But, more importantly, they showed the rescue operation, human soldiers risking their lives to extract not just their own people, but hundreds of other prisoners from dozens of different species. The Galactic Council was informed of this attack, Thompson continued, his voice carrying across frequencies that would reach every inhabited system within 50 light-years. They expressed their regrets and advised us to accept this tragedy as an inevitable cost of expansion into dangerous space. We have chosen to respond differently. The message concluded with footage of the rescued civilians being reunited with their families aboard the human ships, children running into their parents' arms, couples embracing after days of believing they would never see each other again, elderly prisoners weeping with relief as they realized they were finally safe. But the final image was of Admiral Thompson himself, standing on the bridge of his flagship with the ruins of the Korthax system visible through the viewports behind him. Let this serve as notice to any individual or organization that might consider human civilians to be easy targets, he said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute conviction. We are not members of the Galactic Council because we require their protection. We are members because we choose to be civilized. But, when civilization fails to protect the innocent, we will respond with methods that are considerably less civilized. The transmission ended, but its effects would ripple across the galaxy for years to come. Within hours, the recording was being analyzed by intelligence services throughout known space. Within days, it would be discussed in the chambers of the Galactic Council, where representatives who had dismissed humanity as a minor power would suddenly find themselves reconsidering their assumptions. Most importantly, in the hidden bases and secret meeting places where slavers and pirates planned their operations, the name human would become synonymous with a kind of retribution that was as inevitable as it was final. The Celestial Dreams had carried 300 civilians on a routine journey between worlds. Her destruction had seemed like just another tragedy in the vast, dangerous galaxy. But, from that tragedy had emerged a truth that would reshape the balance of power among the stars. Humanity would protect its own, no matter the cost, no matter the distance, no matter the enemy. The galaxy had been warned. The lesson had been taught. And, in the expanding debris field that had once been the Sindari 4th Assault Fleet, Admiral Thompson's ships began the journey home, carrying with them the rescued civilians and the knowledge that sometimes, the only response to evil that would be understood was overwhelming, decisive force applied without hesitation or mercy. The hunt was over. Justice had been served. And, the galaxy would never again mistake human civility for weakness.